All righty. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we return to the country of Peru. So in our All Things Peru and All Things Latin America edition, who better than to have on our returning champion, Claudia O'Brien Moscoso. Did I please tell me I pronounced that correctly?
Yeah, it's Claudia.
All right, Claudia O'Brien Moscoso,
Yeah.
who is who is a who is a Peruvian American independent journalist and leftist activist, a frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, and a member of the Black Alliance for Peace. And she's our guest for the program. So first off, Claudia, hola! It's a real honor to have you back on the program.
Thank you so much, Youri. It's always great to be here. Great to see you.
Likewise, and because we're a bit short on time, let's get straight into the topics. And so, firstly, what are some critical updates you can give us on Peru from the ongoing Western-backed right-wing terror to the popular people power left-wing mobilization against this illegitimate government?
Yeah, well, so a very important date is coming up on December 7th, which is the year anniversary of the right-wing parliamentary coup against Pedro Castille. The masses on the ground have declared the days December 7th, 8th, and 9th as straight days of struggle. And what's been happening is, it's interesting. Pardon. Boluarte and members of the illegitimate coup regime have been flying around the world lately to go to different things, right? The last thing that she was at was at APEC in San Francisco.
APEC,
APEC, yes. So she was at one of the, but interestingly enough, she has been getting dubbed by most of the leaders that had previously been either on her side or favorable or at least not antagonistic to her. So Chile's Boric canceled a meeting with her in San Francisco at the APEC. The government of Canada, I'm not exactly sure which representatives, also canceled a meeting with her during that time. She was also at the UN General Assembly here in New York, and organizations and Peruvians in diaspora came out to both, make sure that at every event that she was at, people are outside. And at the last day she was here, or at the last event that she was here for, was the Alliance of the Pacific Investor Summit, in which several people went inside and disrupted her speech. Of course, she blamed the she said that people were paid by Castillo, and this is just their particular brand of terrorism. So she continued.
At least she didn't blame the Russians or the Chinese, right?
Right. But then actually a couple of weeks ago, at the OAS, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, there was a public hearing on Peru on the violence since December of last year. 3 of the victims were here, representatives of the associations of the regions where they're from, along with their lawyers and a couple of other folks, and representatives of different NGOs in Peru and outside, and representatives of the state. So the U.S. ambassador, or I'm sorry, the OAS, the Peruvian ambassador to the OAS was here, Ambassador Adrian Sen. There was also an unplanned interruption during the time that the state was, representatives of the state were giving their testimonies, because at every turn they were lying. They said that they've given the victims monetary compensation. They have not. They said that they've given them, increased medical attention. They have not. And as one of the members in the audience, got up and rightfully, right, it was an unplanned thing, right? I think that was something that just, you hear something, someone in power so blatantly lie, that it aggravates you and moves you to action. And so she said, the state is lying, the state is lying. And he immediately directed it to the audience and the victims themselves and said, these are the people that caused the violence. They're the ones that caused the deaths. They are the ones that are responsible for their own deaths. So that is the line that the government, the coup regime, and representatives of the government have been saying, that, in fact, everything that it's interesting. I forget what meeting I was in recently that I mentioned this as well, that it reminds me of the way that Israel is acting and saying that we are the victims, right? The coup happened to us, right?
Really?
Yeah, the coup happened to us. The victims killed themselves. The protesters are the ones that are the terrorists, right? So like they flip everything and victimize themselves. It's interesting the playbook that they use, right? These like compradors and vassal states of the U.S. That play into have the same playbook, and are using similar rhetoric, trying to justify the terror that they themselves are inflicting on the peoples, for lands, for control over the country. So those are some of the things that have been happening. Internally, what has also been happening has been the Congress, the coup Congress has been further taking and consolidating power over independent institutes of power, right? So the Constitutional Tribunal, they're trying to take power in that realm, right? And this is the body that is going to be hearing the case of habeas corpus for the president, for Castillo. So which would eventually, that is the case that would ideally actually free him and restore and restitute him to power.
Can you give us some updates? Can you give us some updates on
Yeah.
Pedro Castille and
Yeah. So
yeah, because he still is wrongly imprisoned. How is he faring?
Right. So he is still, exactly, he's still wrongfully imprisoned. His lawyers, particularly the international lawyers, Argentinian lawyers, Eugenio Zaffaroni and Guido Croxato, have they've been arguing this. Really, all the lawyers have been arguing this case, and I think that they've also been pushing it in the international realm. And we recently, the comrades at Hood Communists recently published a translation I did of one of their articles that kind of goes into step by step what the illegalities of that impeachment were. So the way that the right-wing Congress and not just the Congress, but the right wing of Peru and those that say that Castillo was the one that enacted the coup, not that it was a self coup, an autogolpe, akin to what Fujimori did in '92 to take power, was that he declared. So he gave a speech declaring on December 7th that his intention to dissolve Congress because it was an obstructionist Congress. This is something that the lawyers argue, right, is there is no intention in reading a piece of paper when there was no actual coup, because he didn't have the support of the military or the police force. In fact, Lisa Kenna, a day or two, I believe, prior to December 7th, to the parliamentary coup, Lisa Kenna, the U.S. ambassador to Peru, quote unquote, former CIA agent and right-hand woman to Mike Pompeo, met with the Department of Defense. I'm sorry, not Department of Defense, but the Minister of Defense, Bobio Rojas, and basically assuming is to say and to convince him not to back up Castillo. In this declaration of him trying to dissolve Congress. Also, the way that the impeachment was held, there was no he hasn't been given, his habeas corpus rights have been fully violated. He's stuck in, he was handed at first an 18 months preventative detention, so pretrial detention, and then handed another 36 months. And these are for the charges of rebellion, and I forget what other charge. But so these are charges, and also the number of votes that were needed to pass the impeachment was 104. They only reached 101. So all of the impeachment is null, right? So in fact, Castillo still remains rightful president, which is why many on the ground, the masses say that Dina Boluarte is a usurper of power, right? They don't see her as legitimate. They didn't vote for her. They didn't vote for her they voted for her as vice president of Castillo. They did not vote for her to become president and completely align herself with the right wing. Right. So, and enact, at this point, the numbers are over 100 dead. But even those numbers are, contested on the ground. Thousands injured, thousands political prisoners. And some other organs, other institutes are also being taken up by this Congress, by the right-wing Congress. The Defensoría del Pueblo, which is kind of the ombudsman, has been taking control. Right, the Congress pretty much owns the guy that runs that now. The Fiscalía, the prosecution, has been fully taken over by the right-wing Congress, and all of the cases against of the martyrs or of the injured, those cases have been going from different township, region to region, right? So how they call it is la carpeta está yendo a fiscalías diferentes, right? So the case itself is being handed over from region to region in a way that or being brought to Lima, right? So a lot of the massacres and extrajudicial killings happen in the South, which by no surprise is where the majority of the vast reserves of mineral riches are, right? Particularly lithium in Puno. It was so those cases and those massacres happened in the South, but those cases now are in Lima, which means that a lot of the family members and those that were injured have to travel 25 plus hours, right, by bus, to get from where they live to Lima, to go in front of a judge for hearing or something like this, right? So it's meant to hold face. It's meant to just fully, like, it is a full state of impunity at this point. So a lot has been happening. The folks on the ground have been getting ready, and outside, right, have been getting ready for the 1-year anniversary. And there's also just a lot of what I would consider different forces vying for movement control. Yeah.
It's actually do talk more about that. So yeah, talk more about that actually then.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, even on the ground and even from the beginning, not all the demands have been fully 100%, consolidated around. For sure, getting rid of Boluarte has been like everyone's rallying cry, and also a new constitution, something that even before the coup, right, those that voted for Castillo, one of the main platforms voted for was a constituent assembly for a new constitution that would bring in the voices and representation and interests of the most marginalized in Peruvian society, particularly the indigenous, rural, agricultural, rural workers, right? Those that worked land. And those that have been historically, isolated from centers of power and from the one real center of power in Lima, which is, post colonization and also post becoming a republic, all sort of like economic, political, cultural power has really been consolidated around Lima, when really, right, like Lima itself can't grow food, can't grow, you know, like every resource that we have in Lima, whether it comes from electricity to the water to the food, everything comes from the outer regions, right? So it's very much a cancerous cell in the body politic of Peru.
Unbelievable.
But even within Lima, which is a city of, I think at this point we're about 12 million people, right? The center of Lima is very much, right, where political power, economic power, everything is, right? But Lima itself has outer, I guess in New York, you might think about it as outer boroughs. In Lima, in Peru, we say los conos de Lima, right? The cones of Lima, because it's north, south, east, west, right? So people that live in Lima in the outer boroughs have to travel like 2, sometimes 3 hours by bus to get to work in Lima, in downtown Lima, right? To get to, you know, where they serve the like wealthy and elite and the ambassadors from around the world in like Miraflores and in San Isidro. But they themselves live in, you know, Punta Piedra or San Martin de Porres, or, you know, in the outer cones of Lima. And those people that live in the outer cones of Lima are, if they themselves are not from Campo, from the southern or outer regions of Peru, their grandparent or their parents are, right? So they are the ones that have faced internal forced displacement, go to the city because that's where, you know, economic power is, that's where you can potentially feed your family. But even within Lima, they face discrimination, they face, you know, a lot of these cerros, right, that it's literally just like, you know, dirt mounds, right, that they have like these little huts. It's really truly like unforgivable conditions
Wow.
to live in, that don't have running water, don't have, you know, the most basic of necessities. They like, it's really like first world, third world conditions in the matter of like a 20-minute bus ride. And so you
That's
really,
so grotesque.
yeah. And so you really see the, you know, class and race divides and antagonisms. And that has very much played a role in this past year, right? A lot of there's continued repression. A lot of the comrades in Peru, whether it's in Lima or in the outer regions, have had to, you know, step back from doing a lot of work. They've had to maybe not take part in all of the, you know, in the strike actions. And I would say maybe in this time since December 7th, the regions that have been where you really feel the national strike, which has been ongoing really since then, is in the south, is in Puno, is in the southern regions that have faced, is in Ayacucho, is in Arequipa. The regions that have faced the most violence from this repression. And yeah, so people are getting ready, right? People outside of the country are also getting ready to yeah.
Basically, basically try to keep calm and carry on, but keep mobilizing. But then I
Yeah.
have to, but then I have to ask this because you mentioned that there's tensions going on between the people power movement itself. So are people you know, people who have lived in Peru their, you know, their entire lives, so there's that grassroots left movement. Are they clashing with those who might come from a middle class background, but they are leftists, but their connection is more to the kind of NGO worlds which
Right.
usurps
Yeah.
which,
So
which,
there's
which
a lot of that. There's a lot of the NGO-ization
yeah,
usurpation of space, right? There's also opportunism, right? A lot, and particularly in diaspora. You know, I've been here my whole life, basically 31 years at this point, right? And as far as I remember, particularly in the East Coast, New Jersey, New York area, the diaspora has pretty much been like consistently hard right wing, right? And then all of a sudden Castillo becomes president, or is part of that, of you know, they go to the second round, and there's possibility that there's going to be a left wing president, and all of a sudden people find their way to the left wing. And it's so interesting, you know, and so people, yeah, there's been a lot of interesting ideological contradictions, right? People that literally consider themselves Zionists, funding and founding organizations that now take up a really big part in like diaspora work. People that were not so long ago whose family members ran under, you know, a center right wing party in Peru that, you know, consider themselves the vanguard of solidarity organizing.
Wow.
And there's also a lot of like tension around and you know, us being in like actual organizing spaces. This tension goes everywhere, right? The difference between organizing and mobilizing, and people think that those are actually the same thing when in fact they're not. And working really meticulously to isolate more radical forces. Yeah. So and then also the NGOs, right? APRODE, for example, Asociación Pro Derechos Humanos, is one of the organizations that the lawyer is the lawyer for the folks that were here for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Gloria Cano, that's a lawyer that was here. They get funded in large part by USAID and have also meticulously decided to separate and really isolate victims that for sure have political leanings and victims that were, you know, just happened to be walking by or were a doctor and like saw what was happening, went to like, you know, do his job and was murdered, right? So and separating, you know, good versus bad victims, separating the people from from the president, right, who we consider him to be the you know, for this coup regime's first political prisoner. He doesn't get access to sunlight. He there have been allegations and pretty credible ones, that they've been trying to poison him from day one. He doesn't eat unless you know, a family member of his goes to, so in Peru you get fed by like people coming in and like leaving you food there, right? Like that's a big difference here versus there. So unless he physically sees this cousin of his, right, leave off food, he won't eat it. So it's been really intense, right?
Wow.
Yeah, it's been some interesting few months, I would say, since, well, not few months, but I've been back from Peru since mid April, and really getting to know the forces, I guess in diaspora organizing, and not just here, in Europe as well, right? It's an interesting turn of events when you have to sort of justify fundraising to bring Castillo's lawyer in front of the UN to a bunch of bourgeois expats living in Europe that are almost all actually like European descendant.
It's really politics, as you say,
yeah.
like they might be liberal, but basically center right, Like they might say that they're leftists, and they're probably full aware. They're probably even fully aware of the history of Yankee Canuck imperialism
Yeah.
in Peru.
You might say it in words, but
Then when a Chavez comes, or when an
Mhm.
Evo Morales comes, or a Castile, all of a sudden very right wing, right?
Yeah. And also, it's not to say, right, there's internal and rightful criticisms of Castillo when he was, right, in office that I think is necessary to talk about, right? But of course, you have to know when and where and with whom, right? Because that's not always, those criticisms are always going to be levied by opportunistic forces, right? Or forces, liberal forces that, want to separate the reason why these murders happen from the actual massacres, right? It's not like these massacres happened out of nowhere, right? These people were of the 90 percentile of the indigenous campesino voters who voted for Castillo in power, right? The reason they came out is because they understood that their president had just been deposed illegally, right? So for certain liberals, organizations, and even political parties to try to separate that, right, the massacres from the reason that they went out and protested in the first place, also is like opportunistic, right? A lot of political parties on the center left, they don't align with the demand for liberty and restitution. They agree that he's wrongfully imprisoned, but they are calling for new elections in which they would be presenting their own candidates, right? Their own candidates, which are very much aligned with U.S. funded NGOs. So
That is so unbelievable. And I was actually going to save this question for last, but you've just opened up a huge can of worms. So let's actually dive deeper into this, which is, what is the state of the Latinx left in the U.S.? Because I wanted to know, can you explain why some of those in the community can be fully aware of how U.S. and Western imperialism impacts their home country, hence why some have to immigrate and some illegally have to immigrate, and yet these same folks can be supportive of the US's war on Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other targeted countries, such as yours truly. And I know that you're, because I know before you respond to that, because I know you're one of those in the Latinx community, a leftist, one that is supportive of the communist government of of Cuba. So how do you communicate with some, with one of these like Cuban exiles who might have legitimate grievances, like they might have legitimate grievances against the Cuban government, but then they'll claim to be a leftist, and they'll be supportive of efforts to overthrow the government, and even still be supportive of the embargo on Cuba. So yeah, so how do you explain all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a pretty classical, like, social democrat versus actual socialist leftist. I mean, we were just saying it before, right? There's once an actual Chavez enters the room, once Ortega enters the room, once Morales enters the room, and it's a little different, right? And so yeah, it's that difference between, right, the like Borichis of the diaspora versus the Chavez's, right? And actually, I would say Boric was he was going to meet with Boluarte at APEC, but a letter handed to him, or I don't know if it was directly to him, but maybe like a representative or something, by one of Castillo's lawyers, Guido Croxato. It was a letter from Castillo stating to Boric, you have blood on your hands if you meet with this dictator. You've shaming him, and it worked, right? Shame works oftentimes.
Actually, wait, repeat it again. So Boric was going to meet
going to meet with Boluarte
okay,
in San Francisco at the APEC summit, right? At the last minute, cancels it after having received this letter from Castillo's lawyer, and was from Castillo, handed the
saying
letter.
that, saying that you do this, you have blood on your hands.
Yeah, yeah, and just saying, right, like you have acknowledged her, you've cozied up in the beginning days, particularly after there was a raid, a military styled raid on one of the universities that was hosting delegations from the South. He came out, and many of the regional leaders came out saying that these are dark days, right? This is very much like a Plan Condor 2.0, seeing military tanks literally like busting through the door of a university. So he goes from having statements like this to then throughout the months, right, cozying up more and more and more, to the point that then Mexico, having denied Boluarte and Peru the presidency of the Pacific Alliance of the Pacific, gives it to Boric. Boric gives it to Peru. Yeah, right. So and we know Boric has also sold out his people, so we should not be at all surprised by this, right? He's
exactly, but
yeah.
But it's so but again, like for me it's just so striking that a people like the like the Hispanic or Latinx people of the U.S., many of them from from diaspora backgrounds, many of them from working class backgrounds who had to flee whatever, basically had to flee because of U.S. backed imperialism, and yet it's just stunning how how those same people can then believe the propaganda of we have to support the U.S. efforts to overthrow Maduro or overthrow Ortega, and like for me, I just find that just stunning, and yes, so how do you explain that? Is that just people who want to become assimilated and become part of the U.S. and have a place, or is there something deeper going on?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do, with, yeah, exactly, said assimilation. Yeah, I guess while many are from working class backgrounds, I'd say a big chunk of them are actually, who you would consider were the middle class of their countries fleeing, right? Trying to maintain some sort of class privilege, I guess, come here and get knocked down a peg, but eventually make it up, right? Like the American dream does quote unquote work for them. So they're not trying to, and I've literally been told this, they're not trying to bite the hand that feeds them, which is interesting. So I attribute a lot of this to a deep lack of political education, which is a project that I think at least the folks that I work with in Peru, in the regions, in diaspora, I think that's our main objective is actual political education, because we see a lot of these contradictions, right? And I think a lot too is there's a lot of just also opportunists and infiltrators that are around that are muddying up the waters, right? That are intentionally out here trying to sow division, isolate certain forces, sort of be the only forward-facing formations that are visible, right? And oftentimes these folks themselves are like I said, like part of bourgeoisie here, or were part of the bourgeoisie in Peru, come here as middle class, right? Like small business owners, whose family members also still run under center right parties in Peru. So,
unbelievable.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of opportunism, and yeah.
But then, how do we overcome somebody like that? And how do we and then how do we overcome somebody like the one odd Cuban exile who claims he's of the left, claims he's against U.S. imperialism, but still, supports the embargo on Cuba, and yeah, and so they'll claim that they'll be on the left, and maybe they have good opinions on such and such an issue, but then are so reactionary on that they end up, when push comes to shove, they end up becoming like well, I mean, you mentioned somebody like Boric, or something like those
Marker.
doofuses, like those doofuses who are kneecapping the Peruvian left wing revolution right now. Like, how do we overcome those folks?
Raise the contradictions, make people choose, right? Like that's what you do. You isolate those forces that do those things. Yeah. I think that's one of the things you do, right? I think also still maintaining organization and discipline when it comes to political education. So there's having to sort of navigate these forces, and that's like navigating real politic stuff. But yeah, I think a big part of it is just maintaining doing the work you're doing, maintaining those grassroots connections while doing political education and raising the contradictions enough to make people choose.
And
And
are
I
there
think
any And are there any, Latinx left groups that you can recommend that people should get involved with, who are on the right side of history and are really trying to help out the true, grassroots, Peruvian left, and even, in general, the true left in Latin America, and not, those grifters and opportunists, the enemies from within.
yeah, I mean, being in Black Alliance for Peace, I'm going to shout us out, but also our Zone of Peace campaign that has, I believe at this point we have over 75 members and member organizations signed on that are working with us on this. Organizations from Nicaragua, organizations from Cuba, from around the region, and inside the U.S. I think our focus is on making sure we follow leadership from the South, right? But understanding that folks in North America still actually comprise the contiguous landmass that we call Nuestra America, not just we, but like is a revolutionary, right? Theorizing of one united socialist Western Hemisphere. So yeah, I would say folks in the Zone of Peace campaign, right? A lot of organizations on the ground that have been on the ground for a long time, around probably, yeah, I would say around the world, even a lot of the comrades in there's a thing called the Red Wifalas Network, which is Andeans, not just from Peru, but from the Andes regions,
Oh,
that
brilliant.
that are scattered around the world, but are doing either organizing work or independent press work around people's movements and developments in Latin America. Yeah, I would say follow that work. I think I'm also a member of the organization in Peru. It's called Consejo por la Emancipación Plurinacional de Peru, which is translated as the Council for Plurinational Emancipation of Peru. And we're also an organization that has kind of started out from the beginning, slowly building up a team, and hoping that we can actually really focus on political education in the regions, right? Working with folks in the region from Cusco, Puno, Arequipa, Ayacucho, and actually like leftists in diaspora, because I think that there's just a lot of especially like not even in Peru too, right? Like a lot of the folks in Lima are very much tied to this like Western NGO funded world, and in Peru we call it caviar, right? Which is would be liberals here. So folks on the ground are really trying to get away from that because, and these people could have the best intentions, right? That's great. You're like cool to hang out with. Like, let's go grab a, coffee or beer, or whatever. Let's go watch a football game. But like, I'm not going to trust, political leadership and development in you because you are funded by the people that are directing this, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's
And
like
so and so often, as somebody who I mean, I'm definitely of like a middle class background, but as someone who definitely grew up amongst what our working class left wing friends would they say would discuss like the bourgeoisie and so forth. As someone who
yeah,
who has spent his entire life growing amongst that, and even people who are even like way above that, like literally like the affluent, the like one percenters, the like yeah, like they might be nice, yeah, like they might be nice people as you said, like great to like go to like a club with and stuff like that, but not people I would ever trust politics because once you really start like getting like deep into like their mentality, like these are the type of people who would vote for an Obama, a Clinton,
happily.
and with yeah my criticisms of Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders aside, but these are the type of people who would never ever vote for folks like that because they're a threat. They literally are like a threat to their hold on socioeconomics. So yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, at the end of the day, I think really understanding the class characteristics of these different forces, right, really helps you give you clarity as to like what the interests are, right? So when I understood that this lawyer for the victims, works for an organization that gets funded by USAID, okay, cool, I got you. Don't even worry about it, right? Then I actually understood why maybe she was working behind the scenes to try to cancel a press conference I had helped organize. Like, oh, okay, I got you. I see you, sis. I see you.
Well, so actually, Claudia, how much more time do I have with you? Are we all
About like 20 minutes.
okay. Then final question, and I have to ask. I asked you this question before, but I have to ask again, given that it's given that November is almost done, and looking at your wonderful shirts, I know that there's been lots of indigenous people who have been mobilizing in solidarity for Palestine. I recently was in Australia, and I was with my Aboriginal friends there, and so the plight of indigenous people once again is like is burning in my mind. So I have to ask this question, which is what's it going to take for the Latinx left, the Black left, eco-socialist, eco-justice folks, feminist, queer liberationist leftists, even Palestine solidarity folks and the anti-war, anti-imperialist movement and the broad workers' rights movement to show more urgent solidarity to our Native American brothers and sisters, Two-Spirit folks, and of course the indigenous Hawaiians and Alaskans?
I mean, I would say a lot of organization, and understanding that in fact, the forces that are keeping us all down in our various regions of the world are in fact the same, and headed by the same, right, US Western Empire, right, US EU NATO forces, that have divided the world up into 9 command centers from the US, right, and each command center, as we say in BAP, should also be seen as NATO centers of power, right? So I feel like it's the sooner that we understand that these enemies we have the same enemies, that we are seeing a similar trajectory of settler colonialism, right? We can see it in we were briefly talking about this before we went on live. Malawi is set to send young unemployed Africans to Israel to toil the lands, right? So after they like kick out the indigenous population, they bring in Africans to toil the land. That is the story of U.S. Western European, colonization, right? So we see it playing out, with in 2023 with new technology, right? But I think what's different now, obviously, is that people are seeing it and can't deny what's happening, right? They can try to weaponize the discourse and try to repress free speech. But people see it. The world is with Palestine. The world's not with Israel or the U.S. Much like the world, almost how many times now the UN General Assembly has voted to end the embargo on Cuba, and it's only this last time around was U.S. and Israel that were against, and Ukraine that abstained. What do they all have in common?
Exactly, and then final one then is: do you think then that solidarity for Native Americans and Indigenous Hawaiians, Alaskans, do you think that that's going to start to break through, given so many Indigenous people have been participating in these unprecedented global solidarity protests for Palestine, and then with that, and you mentioned that in Black Alliance for Peace, that's actually where a lot of like the Latinx left is actually mobilizing, and with that, you get a renewed solidarity coalition building between the Black left and the Latinx left, right?
Yeah. I mean, this, I think Palestine, the Palestinian cause, has in fact sharpened the contradictions to the point where everyone sees what's happening. And there is a growing alliance, right, forming around, just understanding our shared cause, right, and the shared enemy, and logic that sustains all of our exploitation, not just of ourselves but of the lands, right? It's awful, it's heartbreaking, that it took 20,000 Palestinians, 8,000 Palestinian children, that's what it takes.
Yeah, which is why when I do ask that question about Indigenous folks, I always like, what's it gonna take?
What does it take? And this is the question that literally like people in Peru ask of Lima all the time. Like, it's over 100. What does it take? And I guess that's not enough for some people.
But it's not all it's not all doom and gloom, and that's exactly why people need to join organizations like Black Alliance for Peace. And and once I'm done recording, make sure to send me the links of the other organizations you mentioned. On that note, we were joined on that note. We unfortunately have to end, but we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Claudia O'Brien Moscoso. She's a Peruvian independent journalist and leftist activist, frequent contributor to Black Agenda Report, and a member of Black Alliance for Peace. Claudia, thank you so much for taking the time to come back on, and do stay in touch, and best of luck with all of the work that you're doing in Peru. And I really do hope that that the forces of good will overcome will overcome this constant evil that's going on, and may this finally be, as we said, may this finally be the straw that breaks the camel's back and lefty revolution comes to Peru.
It's coming. Victory is near.